40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin New.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to a special Buckeye Grove Instant Access podcast. We are here in Scottsdale, Arizona at the beautiful Camelback Inn, JW Marriott. They take good care of the media. Christmas Eve is when we're recording this. You may be hearing it on Christmas Day, a little present to you. We are talking the Fiesta Bowl. I have talked to you at length about how Ohio State looks and whatnot, but we are going even deeper. We have brought in one of the best Clemson insiders around. We have brought in Larry Williams, who will give us plenty of insight on what the Tigers are all about as everybody is anticipating this gigantic Fiesta Bowl. But, first and foremost, how you doing, Larry?
Doing great, man. Glad to be with you, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we are again, 2016. I know all the Ohio State fans hate talking about it, but, it happened. 31-0. Not pretty. Ohio State, 250 yards of total offense. Just, it was not a pleasant game. So, a different scenario this time around.
Yeah, different in that I think just looking at Ohio State, having watched them a good bit over the last couple of weeks, they seem to be a lot more diverse on offense, more weapons, more of a challenge defending Fields and Dobbins in the zone read game and all that, and of course Clemson, even though its defensive line I think is pretty good, it's not those wreckers that they had 3 years ago with Christian Wilkins and Cleveland Farrell and Austin Bryan and on down the line. But then again, Clemson's offense this year might be more diverse as well, and that's kind of hard to conceive given how good they were on offense in 2016. But it should be a great game. I just really don't know how to feel about this game because, on one hand, I say, man, I'm not going to bet against Trevor Lawrence for the entirety of his career. But on the other, you can't discount just how talented Ohio State is and some of those matchups that are really intriguing schematically and also in the trenches with Ohio State's offensive line against Clemson's defensive line.
Yeah, let's just jump right into those matchups, and we'll start with Ohio State's offense against Clemson's defense. We'll take a little break, and then we'll go to the other side of the ball and talk a couple other things. Justin Fields, obviously very different type of quarterback than J.T. Barrett. I'm not taking anything away from J.T. Barrett. Still has a lot of records at Ohio State, but much more of a running threat. Ohio State definitely not as diverse on offense as they were in 2016. And, coming off the heels of Dwayne Haskins, who reset the passing record book, you got Justin Fields, who might be a little off of that pace, but 40 touchdowns against 1 interception, run for 10 more. What's the biggest challenge that he presents, in your opinion, to the Clemson defense?
I think it's, as you said, I think Barrett, they were able to zero in on him more, and it really felt like Barrett and Samuel were the main two guys that they had to fear. And I think Brent Venables has cultivated a great reputation for, man, if you just have one or two guys on the other side that he can scheme to take away, then he's going to win most of those battles. But I think the thing that would anytime you have a high level passer and a guy who can make things happen with his legs, and I thought it was really interesting. Brent Venables earlier today said Fields has a Lamar Jackson type quality to him in that you prefer, as a defensive coordinator, you prefer a quarterback who, when he breaks containment, is either going to run all the time or throw all the time. has that type of tendency, whereas Fields can do either one. He just has that dynamic quality, and so I think that when you combine that, with Dobbins, just a great running back. I mean, it's hard to really, you go both ways, which is who's better, Dobbins or ETN. I wouldn't argue with either one. Both of them are just great backs. I think just if you get the zone read game going and Clemson has to devote a lot to stopping the running game, then Ohio State would be able to open up a lot off of that, with Fields keeping. And then, when Ohio State goes empty, and from what I've seen, they go empty quite a bit. I don't want to say it forces Clemson's hand, but I think it keeps them. It sort of inhibits them from being super creative with their blitzes. Some people might argue otherwise, because if you have all those defenders out there in coverage, then you could argue they could bring some of those defenders and move other defenders around. But I think when Ohio State is going empty, they're dangerous just because of all the space that's available and with Fields having been so good. But I'm wondering about that knee. Seeing what he said today, I'm interested to sort of get your take on that. Some people say he's it's just gamesmanship. He's sandbagging, Ohio State sandbagging, but he seems like a really forthright individual. And to me, it just seemed like from the outside looking in, he's just telling the truth. So anyway, that's just my general take on Justin Fields.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And we wrote a story earlier on Christmas Eve on Buckeye Grove talking about Justin Fields' knee situation with the sprained MCL. He really sold it well if it's gamesmanship, because he really doesn't seem to be the guy to go out there and play those types of games. I mean, obviously he's had plenty of time. He's been prepped on it that you're going to be asked early and often about your knee. That's just what it's going to be. He did say he was 85% going into the Wisconsin game in the Big Ten Championship, and he was obviously very limited there. He was sacked several times. We can get into that here in a little bit. Did not look like the same guy. Even his mechanics in terms of throwing appeared to be a little bit different than what we saw earlier in the season. So, I don't know if I'm buying 85 is 85, if that's equal, right, because he's had the couple of weeks. I certainly don't think he's full go. But, I also don't think that there was going to be any scenario where he was going to go sans any, with any brace. I think it was always going to be the lightweight brace instead of the bulky, offensive lineman brace that he wore against Wisconsin. But, and people are going to flip out. They're going to see him come out there in that light brace and, oh, woe is us, 31-0, part 2 is coming here. I think that all things being equal, this 85 is going to be much higher than the other 85, and he has a couple days still to get there. Nobody's at 100% right now. It's just the nature of the game. But I think he's going to be as close as he can be. That's my take. Without giving it a great deal of thought. With it only those interviews only being half a dozen hours ago.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Big Ten Championship, didn't Ryan Day say afterward that he did not want to run him at all in the first half, I guess, or the whole game?
Well, they just really didn't want to run him that much. I mean, I think he had one rushing yard total when it was sack adjusted or whatnot. I mean, if you look at the last 8 quarters, he's had 26 yards rushing, but he's also been under a lot of pressure and lost some yardage because of sacks, but certainly not a lot. I think it's less than 20 carries, but credited to him between those two types of games when you're looking at a guy who has 10 rushing touchdowns on the year. And as the chips were on the table coming down the stretch pre-injury, I mean, he was starting to carry it 20 times. I mean, kind of looking like almost like an Urban Meyer-led type of team, which in some ways with all of his success and whatnot, fans did get a little wonky about running the quarterback so much.
He just looked like somebody to me in that first half in particular, like somebody who was constrained schematically, like not totally comfortable knowing that he was limited, right? And like you mentioned, missing some throws, and the full complement of his abilities didn't. It looked like he was playing like he knew that wasn't that he was being sort of held in check, and that's trouble, I think, against a defense like Clemson's, if that is indeed again going to be the case Saturday night.
Well, let's just play devil's advocate and say he is limited in terms of running, and let's just say he has to be a pro style quarterback there, and we say that in some ways like it's almost a dirty term or whatnot, but somebody who is not going to be able to really lean upon the run game that much, other than maybe some escapability or whatnot, and I'm certainly not saying that's what we're going to see on Saturday. We're just playing hypothetical here. But where does Justin Fields, just as a passer, rank against any of the type of quarterbacks that Clemson may have seen this year? We went kind of round and round about this in the Horseshoe Lounge on Buckeye Grove. I mean, we certainly believe that he's the best quarterback they faced, but who was the best one that they faced, outside of that? Was it Sam Howell at UNC? Was it Kellen Mond at Texas A&M? Yeah. I mean, there certainly was not a deep roster of quarterbacks there. You look at maybe one of the more prolific passing attacks in the ACC with Wake Forest, and Sage Surratt wasn't in that game. So then, the Demon Deacons are a very different team than what they were earlier in the year. I mean, who's kind of the the benchmark of who it is that they've played right now, and what kind of difference are we talking about going from this quarterback to Justin Fields?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a high-level passer. I guess I think that if theoretically the run threat is taken away, if it's not there to a significant degree, and he has to be that type of pocket sort of pro style, whatever passer, I just think it plays into Clemson's hands schematically, number one, because their secondary is so good. They are seasoned, talented. I think there are some matchups there that should concern them, particularly when Ohio State, goes 5 wide and trying to get Clemson's safeties, particularly Tanner Muse, isolated in coverage. But it just seems to me that Ohio State's going to have to score, right? So, I don't see Clemson's offense being held down. I don't see this being like a 24-21 type of game, and so it just seems to me that's not saying that Fields, won't have his plays, in the passing game. Certainly he would, but I just think that Venables is such a decorated schemer with weeks to prepare. I guess what I'm saying is Fields, as a 100% dual threat quarterback, most certainly should strike fear into Clemson. You saw in the ACC championship game when they played Virginia. The score of that game, 62-17. Of course, you look at that and you say, okay, just a typical Clemson ass whooping. But early in that game, Bryce Perkins was able to get free with his legs, and you saw sort of some of the dynamics of, okay, here's how a supremely talented offense with a legit dual threat quarterback could, like Fields, could get to them. I guess the point is that you need everything in your arsenal, to put up the type of points in this type of game, which I think it's going to be. So I think that's a big deal. If he's not that, if his legs are not, what they are under ordinary circumstances.
Well, something obviously that Ohio State would have to rely upon then is the run game with J.K. Dobbins, and he's within striking range of the all-time single-season record held by Eddie George, and I believe it was 1995 of. Check me if I'm wrong. I think it was 1,927 yards. I think that number is well within reach. Dobbins would have to go otherworldly to hit the 2,000-yard mark in this game. I mean, Ohio State fans probably would need to see the win in one more game for him to get to that mark. But, Dobbins certainly has proven to be one of the top backs. He was not in New York for the Heisman. Ohio State just couldn't send everybody. It just didn't happen that way. But, what kind of challenges does J.K. and the run game present to a Clemson defense that, just has looked so strong all year?
Just an elite back that, runs so well through contact, and, you better buckle your chin strap when you use all the cliches, whatever. When when you're trying to tackle that guy. Clemson has been a good tackling team. They had some issues early in the season at the second level with their tackling, but they've cleaned those up for the most part. I think that, again, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, Clemson's defensive line was easily the biggest question mark coming into the season. And, I thought, and I think some of the coaches thought, that it was going to be a work in progress early in the season. They were going to, they looked at their schedule and they saw, in games 2 and 3, Texas A&M at home, a formidable offense with Kellen Mond and some of those receivers. And then they're going to Syracuse. Obviously, Syracuse, garbage in hindsight. But I'm just saying, going into the year, you're going up to Syracuse against Dino Babers, where you lost the last time, and against a theoretically powerful offense. Certainly, that didn't materialize. But they're thinking they're probably going to give up some points early in the year as the defense grows up, as guys up front, and so they're going to have to score a lot of points. Well, as it turned out, Venables had been cooking up a 3-down look all off season, and he sprang it against Texas A&M. It totally spooked Kellen Mond, and so all through the year, that defensive line has grown up. The talent behind them has really elevated and asserted itself, and then Venables' ability as a tactician and adapting and coming up with different ways to move his pieces around, Isaiah Simmons, Kayvon Wallace, it's all over the field, bringing blitzes from different angles. They've been able to cover that up. The defensive line sort of drop off, I guess you could say. And so I think the biggest fear going into this game for most Clemson fans is, okay, this defensive line has not faced an offensive line of Ohio State's caliber. Clemson's defensive line is a little smallish. And so what if Ohio State just comes and pushes them around, and then that gets J.K. loose in the through the A gaps, and then that opens up a whole host of problems, because then Clemson's having to devote more of their back end personnel up to helping with the run, and then Fields could become that effective drop back passer from the pocket. And so I think the world of Dobbins. I've been really impressed with him. Sort of going back to the previous topic of Fields as a purely a pocket-type passer, if his knee is indeed that limiting. One thing that I've noticed is Dobbins has some issues in pass pro. Showed up against Wisconsin. Fields holds the ball, looks like a little too long. I mean, the sacks, the number of sacks they've allowed really stands out, given he's a dual-threat quarterback, and theoretically, you're those types of talents don't really get sacked often, but as a running back, just the total package, really, it seems like. And also I should add, he's been Ryan Day and that offensive staff, I've been impressed at how they've been able to get him out into the passing game unaccounted for, and to really hurt people that way with the ball in the air.
You talk about how Brent Venables was able to kind of spring that 3-down look and whatnot, but do you think that we're beyond week 13 at this point? I mean, this is going to be the 14th game. We're in December, like late December at this point. I think you can spring some blitzes and certain things there, but do you think you can really surprise your opponent? I mean, you've had to put a lot on tape, and while everybody can go around and we're going to talk about this, Paul, Clemson ain't played nobody, but maybe they haven't had to show as much as some other teams have with that. But do you think that there really is the chance that you could sit there and just completely and a zebra could become a bear or something? I don't know.
I don't think that Venables. I don't think it's an issue of Venables has spent 3 weeks concocting all sorts of tricks per se. I think it's more whether they're facing Ohio State on a week's preparation or 3 weeks. It's just the volume of looks that he throws at everybody. He's known as a big blitz-heavy guy, but it's really not so much that as he'll just bring people from unpredictable angles, and he'll play zone behind it a good bit. And so it's not like he's bringing 6 and 7 guys, and just kitchen sink zero coverage blitzes. He's very creative and safe, I guess, in some of his calls. It's just you never know where the defender is going to be coming from, and then you have stunts in front of that. And I think he's just very good at confusing quarterbacks. Last year against Alabama, Tua going into that game was just regarded as being flawless. He was a superb quarterback, and he always has been. But one thing they really did in that game that nobody had really seen, to a large extent, was they really pounced on his tendency to, once his first read was taken away, Tua kind of struggled to go through to the second and third option. And so if there's a weakness there in a quarterback's game, even the best of the best, I think Venables is gonna find it.
We'll touch upon a couple more things here on the other side of the break as we talk about Clemson's tremendous offense going against a solid Ohio State defense. But let's take a break from one of our sponsors.
Hague Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com.
Welcome back to the BIA show. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Larry Williams, one of the best Clemson insiders out there. And we spent the first 20-some minutes, a real long segment for us in terms of what we do here on the BIA show, talking about Ohio State's offense, about Clemson's defense. Let's go to the other side. Trevor Lawrence, he did not, he didn't get the type of notoriety of Joe Burrow or Justin Fields or Jalen Hurts, but all he did was just get better as the season went along. Maybe a little bit of a rough start in terms of touchdown to interception ratios and whatnot, but once he got everything figured out, he was as efficient as anybody out there. Led the way in a lot of things.
Yeah, early on, it was surprising. He had 8 interceptions, and I guess it was the first 6, 7, whatever. It wasn't the number of picks. He was throwing the ball right into the chest of people, which you never saw last year. Georgia Tech had an almost pick 6, which he saved by running and tackling the guy right near the goal line, and then there was a couple other plays that. Passes that could have easily been picked. Syracuse threw the ball right into the chest of a guy. Just really, really surprising, And then North Carolina didn't play a really good game in that one. And then Louisville was the big one where in the first quarter of that game threw 2 end zone interceptions, right to the guys, just terrible plays. And that really, I think, dictated a lot of the narrative about Trevor nationally for like a month after that. It was what's wrong with Trevor and this and that. And meanwhile, he picked it back up in that very game against Louisville and had a great game, a great final 3 quarters. And then since then has just been on an absolute tear. I can't think of one pass that has been close to being intercepted since then, So I think he was maybe feeling the pressure of going the entire off season of hearing he's Superman, reading and hearing what people were saying about him. And I think maybe that started to get to him a little bit by his own admission. But he turned it around by sort of saying, you know what, people are going to say what they're going to say, and just sort of locked in. And I think just sort of he stopped taking as many risks down the field. He started hitting his check downs with Travis Etienne, who's been more productive in the passing game since then. And, I love Joe Burrow. I really like Justin Fields, but Trevor Lawrence is going to be the better NFL prospect, I think, considerably. And we could very well be sitting here at the end of this season saying, he was the best quarterback in the 19 football season as well, even though he had some scuffles early on.
I mean, as you said, that as the season went on, really didn't put a ball in harm's way as things were going on. But is there anything that consistently that, if you were attacking Trevor Lawrence, if you were a DC and you were looking at him, is there anything that you sit there and say, okay, well, he's just merely average at this? I mean, I'm not even go so far and say, what is he below average at? I don't think there's really anything. But where might, the closest thing to a vulnerability be?
I can't think of anything that he's average at. I mean, he's even highly underrated as a runner. That dude can run, and if you don't account for that, he's going to hurt you. Both scrambling, design runs, throwing on the run. He can run away from people. I think earlier in the season, a lot of this season, defenses have chosen to sit back and drop 7 or 8, try to keep the receivers in front of them, try to make them execute down the field. North Carolina had a lot of success blitzing right up the middle, and stressing Travis Etienne in pass protection. He also has had issues at picking up blitzes like Dobbins. So that's going to be interesting to see. I don't think you want to blitz him from the edges because he's going to see it and he's going to make you look silly if you do. I'm really interested to see how Ohio State plays the receivers. I know that Ohio State has played a lot more zone this year than last, and that's resulted in a lot fewer big plays allowed. I think that would be the smart thing to do. Although some people might say, hey, this is a big-time matchup, great corners, a great nickel in Shaun Wade, and so, hey, man up and let's see who's better. But, I would think that Ohio State would notice what other people have done, and people who have given Clemson some problems have sort of played zone and tried to, make them execute down the field and hope he can make a bad decision and pick your spots with zone blitzes and things like that.
You talked about the Clemson receivers, and I remember 2013 Orange Bowl, and Clemson rolled out 2 just genetic freak receivers there. And then, and here we are in 2019, and T. Higgins and Justin Ross, 6'4" guys, big bodies out there. I mean, just the obviously Trevor Lawrence can't do it all by himself. He can't throw it to himself, and he's got some weapons out there. It's Ohio State, they've been very proud of their defensive back lineage, best in America, as they say. You can just turn on, the slate of Sunday games, see all these first-round picks out there playing. What intrigues you most in terms of Ohio State's secondary versus the Clemson receivers, outside of the fact of just how Ohio State is even going to try and attack them in terms of, I personally don't see them doing a lot of press man. We saw what happened with that last year when Ohio State had its issues. That's not necessarily what Ohio State wants to do in terms of their defense. They like to go single high safety, 3 corners out there. They like the zone. They like doing those types of things. What's going to draw your eye?
Who Clemson thinks that it can go after. Thinking back to that 16 game, there's, I guess, maybe this notion that Clemson just had a field day through the air. Well, they really didn't. They had some big plays, but they were all, it seems like to me, it was all Mike Williams against Denzel Ward. Clemson zeroed in on that matchup. Ward was pretty much helpless against Mike Williams on maybe 3 really big plays. And then, that was it. And so, is Shaun Wade, that, I don't want to say weakness because he's a really talented, he's going to be a draft pick. From what I can see, those DBs are just dogs. Like, I love watching Arnett, even with the club hand sitting there throwing off a blocker and then making a tackle, with his healthy arm, like that's just, to me, that speaks volumes about his competitive nature and just the type of player he is. And then, of course, Okudah, really, really good, forecast is, I guess, a top 5 pick. And so I think it's great. I think this is just high-level college football, man. But on the other hand, You can have the best DBs in the world, but man, it's hard to defend 6'4" and 6'5" and the ball being placed where you can't get it. It can just be a nightmare when you're having to go up against T. Higgins and Justin Ross at the top of their game.
You know, let's jump to the running game. I know we're going into overtime here as my equipment's falling apart in terms of mic stands. You know, Travis Etienne, 1,500 yards. You know, not many carries. Probably one of the quietest 1,500-yard seasons that I've seen. Ohio State has really made its hay. You know, even in some of its lean years, and there haven't been many of those lean years of stopping those types of runners. I mean, you can sit there in the last tape you can put in Wisconsin. They run for 200 yards. Jonathan Taylor finally solves the Buckeyes after Ohio State had pretty much, you know, owned that series against him. But, you know, the Buckeyes don't give up that much there. You know, how important is no team wants to go through and be one-dimensional. We know that. So, I mean, you know, obviously the answer is going to be, very important. But how important is it going to honestly be for Travis Etienne to get going against an Ohio State defense that really has not given up much on the way of the rushing game?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's obviously a huge part of what Clemson does. You know, I've noticed Ohio State has had some issues crop up a little bit with tackling, maybe not being as stellar recently, I guess, as it had been for most of the season. I guess the notable examples maybe in the conference championship and then against Penn State somewhat there in that third quarter. But Etienne is, you know, a lot like Dobbins, man. He's hard to bring down, and if you have any tackling issues, he's going to expose them just because he runs. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody else who gets to full speed so quickly, like it's behind the line of scrimmage. I mean, he just is shot out of a cannon, and it usually takes multiple guys to bring him down. I think he leads the country in yards after first contact. So he's obviously a big part of it. I just can't get away from thinking, though, if you think back to the last few national champions, this winning a college national championship is about throwing and catching. Like you think to Alabama with Tua and those receivers, you know, two years ago. You think to Deshaun Watson and those receivers in the second half against Alabama in 2016. Heck, even Alabama in the first Clemson showdown right here, it was Jake Coker throwing over the top of Clemson's secondary. Throwing and catching is in a sort of an NFL style offense. I think is maybe bigger than the normal rules you have. Okay, you got to play great defense. You know, got to have a top 5 defense, and you got to run the ball. I'm not so sure that applies anymore, just because you have some sensational quarterbacks and receivers and sensational schemes right now, particularly in this year's playoff.
Yeah, I think, though, if you go back to 2014 when Ohio State won the first CFP championship, that was Zeke Elliott.
Running game was huge in that one, for sure.
And you look at the national semifinals and the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, and for whatever reason, Lane Kiffin, who was the OC, and Nick Saban decided, hey, let's just stop running the ball. And when they stopped running the ball, I mean, Ohio State, you know, largely outplayed Alabama, but just couldn't turn these drives into sixes. They were turning them into threes, and then, you know, things turned in the second half, and we know how that one ended there. But you know, let's finish up our look at position by position, and then we'll just go with a couple of overview statements, and then we'll call it an evening. You look at the Clemson offensive line, you know, veteran laden, except one guy who's out there at left tackle, Jackson Carman, guy out of Ohio, who Ohio State desperately wanted, just didn't end up working out that way. Ohio State has arguably the best defensive player out there with Chase Young. I know a lot of Clemson fans would, you know, want to sit there and throw Isaiah Simmons out there. I mean, I know that there are some really talented guys out there, but for my money, I say it's Chase Young. How do you think that matchup between Chase Young and Jackson Carman is going to go? And do you think Clemson has enough faith in in just what it does to not have to put a ton of resources, 2.5 guys on slowing down Chase Young?
I think they have faith and confidence in their two tackles, Ankrum and Carmen, and I think Young will probably be on both sides, as he has been for most of the year. But certainly, if you're Ohio State, you want to put him over the sophomore who hasn't faced this type of test. But I think I would imagine they're gonna see how their tackles do first, and if they start to get embarrassed, then of course it's all hands on deck. Clemson. I've mentioned Travis Etienne has struggled in protection, and so if you're Clemson, you can't feel overwhelmingly confident about him helping with Young. As far as tight ends go, Luke Price, kind of an obscure guy, is their most physical blocker. They have a freshman named Davis Allen, also J.C. Chalk, who's a veteran who not a very good blocker for most of this year, but has improved. And then Braden Galloway, who was among the Osterine suspensions last year, is back. And while a lot of Clemson fans are hopeful that he'll be able to play significantly in this game, I just wonder, I don't know. I mean, tight ends are going to have to help block Chase Young, and I don't know if Braden Galloway is that type of player just yet. I really liked some of the things Wisconsin did schematically to sort of neutralize Young. They got their quarterback involved in the run game. They did a lot of horizontal stuff to sort of either running away from Young or reading him, and sort of it looked like they neutralized him a fairly good bit in that first half. And so I would think that Clemson, with having all this time to prepare, they have a lot of bells and whistles in their arsenal horizontally and all that, and getting Trevor involved in the running game probably. I think their sort of tactical schematic weapons maybe are better than their blocking weapons outside of the tackles, right? And so if you're, in terms of trying to help with the H-backs, and as Tony Elliott told us earlier today, it's like you just can't keep everybody in the block. You got to have some people out in the pass routes to test, to try to exploit what you think you can exploit. So it's a huge challenge for sure. Last year at this time though, Quinnen Williams was the unblockable force for Alabama, and although he had some moments in the championship game, they pass protected extraordinarily well in that game, and it really surprised me. I actually picked Clemson to lose that game because I didn't see how they were going to be able to protect, and so I think that was a good building block both for this season, and of course it gives them confidence that when they're going against another superb All-America elite pass rusher, that they can maybe hold up.
We've talked about how important it would be for Justin Fields to be the dual threat quarterback. There are a lot of key things out there, but in your opinion, what will it take for Ohio State to win this game? 2-point dog in it as of early this week. It's essentially a pick 'em at that point when we're looking at less than a field goal. But what is it going to take for Ohio State to come out with the dub in this one?
Moving Clemson off the ball, Clemson's defensive line between the tackles, running game, because again I think that sets up a lot of other stuff with sort of breaking Clemson's defense down with what Clemson would have to allocate to stopping that. I think Clemson will have to turn it over. I don't know how many times. I'm not of the belief that you hear Clemson fans saying, "Oh, the Big Tens are slow," and Ohio State, they're not that good. I put a lot of stock into what Herb Street says in his analysis. I think he's the best there's ever been as a college football analyst, and he mentioned recently that he ran into Barry Alvarez at the Minnesota-Wisconsin game up in the box, and he asked Alvarez about Ohio State, and Alvarez said it's the most talented, it's the best Big Ten team he's seen since he came to the league in 1990. So I put a lot of stock into that. Again, I have a hard time, arguing with anybody either way in this one. I just go with, when in doubt, I'm betting with number 16 for Clemson and those receivers, because I think now more than ever, winning a national championship is built on throwing and catching.
And that kind of took me into my final question there. I know we still have a couple days until the game. A lot of writers I'm talking to on both sides keep kind of going back and forth. On Monday it's, one team. On Tuesday it's the next team. I wasn't going to put your feet to the fire to make, necessarily a score prediction, but it sounds like you think that when it's all said and done, Clemson comes away with this one?
Yeah, not uber convinced because I still have questions about the defensive line. Now, I will say 3 years ago, not many people had heard of Clelin Ferrell, and he had his coming out party in that game in the Fiesta Bowl. And it's just an example of Clemson's assembly line of defensive linemen. Sooner or later, these young, sort of obscure guys are going to elevate, and you're going to be like, oh, that's another one of those elite guys. And so it could very well be that their defensive line rises up in this game and says, okay, all you people who thought we were the weak link, and maybe Xavier Thomas has his huge breakout game, maybe that Clelin Ferrell had. So that's the biggest question I would have for Clemson. I don't know. I haven't even really thought about a score yet. I think Ohio State is going to score, which could put Clemson in a sort of an uncomfortable position because they're just not used to that. I don't even remember what the question was. Good grief.
Well, no, I was just, it sounds like, based on everything that we've said over the last 42 minutes that, going to be a good one, but, that you think that Clemson is just going to be able to have that little extra something that's going to be able to put them out and put them over the top. Yeah,
at a certain point in Deshaun Watson's career, early, I concluded, I am not ever going to pick against that dude, and I think he lost to Alabama in the first championship and then lost to Pitt the next year. And so I have the same feeling about Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence is better than Deshaun Watson. So I don't think he'll end up being a Peyton Manning type of quarterback. So when he has those receivers on the outside and then Travis Etienne and just so many, they can hurt you in so many ways. It's hard for me to go against them.
Well, it certainly is going to be a heck of a game. Keep it locked in at Buckeye Grove. We'll be running our Tale of the Tape and as a two-part series looking at all the matchups that we talked there. And, of course, we'll have our staff predictions as well. Those who have been kind of following me along on social media know that, as of right now, I'm picking the Buckeyes, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But I want to thank Larry Williams for joining us here on the BIA podcast. I want to thank everybody out there for listening to the show. Have a happy holiday, and looking forward to being able to cover this game coming up on the 28th. And, if Larry's wrong and I'm right, we'll continue this road on to New Orleans. And, other than that, I just want to sit there and say, thanks a lot. Go Bucks, and we will talk to you soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.